There were 4 of us in that lawyer's office. My brother Richard, my sister Diane, her husband, who had never once visited Mom in 20 years, and me. They were dressed nicely, confident, already talking about what they were going to do with their share. They had no idea I'd been planning this day for 6 years. My name is Margaret, and this is the story of how I cared for my mother alone and made sure that when the time came, I would be ready. Mom's name was Patricia, but everyone called her Pat. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, every school play, every scraped knee. She raised 3 children mostly on her own after our father left when I was 9. Richard was the oldest. He moved to Phoenix when he was 24 and called home maybe twice a year. He was charming and successful, and everyone in the family adored him. Diane was the middle child. She married a man named Gerald, a man who spoke loudly and said little, and moved to a suburb 40 minutes away that somehow felt like a different country. And then there was me, the youngest, the one who stayed. Not because I had no options. I had a degree in accounting. I had job offers. I had a life I was beginning to build. But when Mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's at 63, I was 31. And I made a choice. I moved back into my childhood home. I took on remote contract work so I could be there. I became her primary caregiver. At first, my siblings called it temporary. Just until she stabilizes, Richard said. That was 20 years ago. In the beginning, there were promises. Richard would send money every month. Diane would come every other weekend. We would all share the responsibility. In the first year, Richard sent money twice. In the second year, once. By the third year, nothing. He had cash flow problems. He always had cash flow problems, even when he took his family to Cancun. Diane came less and less. Gerald didn't like the drive. Gerald didn't like the smell of illness. Gerald, I began to understand, didn't like anything that required inconvenience. And so I managed alone. I gave Mom her medications at 6 a.m. I drove her to every neurologist appointment, every physical therapy session, every blood test. I learned to cook the soft foods she could swallow safely. I learned to read her moods when words started failing her. I learned what it means to watch someone you love disappear slowly, piece by piece, while still being right in front of you. Meanwhile, my siblings built their lives. Vacations, renovations, grandchildren born that Mom barely got to meet. They came for Thanksgiving. They came for Christmas. They sat at the table and talked about how wonderful it was that she had so much help. That help was me. Every single day, for 20 years. They never said thank you. Not once. But what hurt most wasn't the silence. It was what Diane said one Easter, when I mentioned how exhausted I was, how I hadn't slept properly in weeks. She looked at me and said, "Well, you chose this, Margaret. Nobody forced you." And she went back to her dessert. I was 41 when I made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of spite, out of clarity. I had spent a decade watching my mother age, and I had begun to understand something my siblings hadn't considered. Mom's estate would not manage itself. Her house was paid off. She had savings. She had a life insurance policy she'd kept since the 1980s. None of my siblings knew the details, because none of them had ever asked. I began to educate myself, quietly. I met with an estate attorney, a specialist. I learned about caregiver agreements, legal documents that formally recognize the care one family member provides. and compensate for it. Because here's what most people don't know. When an adult child provides care for a parent, they are legally entitled to compensation. Not charity. Compensation. And if that agreement is documented properly, it is recognized by the courts. Over the next 5 years, Mom and I, together with full legal counsel, signed a formal caregiver agreement. A fair hourly rate, 20 years of care, documented in detail. I didn't do this behind anyone's back. Mom understood. She had understood for a long time. One afternoon, as I was helping her with her medications, she took my hand. "I see you, Maggie," she said. It was one of her clearer days. "I always saw you." I didn't cry until I was in the hallway. Mom passed on a Tuesday in March. It was quiet, the way she would have wanted. She had not been able to speak for the last 3 weeks. But the night before she passed, she squeezed my hand 3 times. "I love you." I squeezed back. Richard and Diane arrived the next morning. The will reading was 10 days later. They arrived confident, Richard in his blazer, Diane clutching Gerald's arm. The attorney's name was Carol. She had a way of delivering information without emotion. I had always appreciated that. She read the standard portions first. Richard received the car. Diane received Mom's jewelry and a small sum of cash. Then Carol set down the will and picked up a second document. She explained what a caregiver agreement was. She explained that it had been signed, witnessed, and notarized 6 years prior. She explained that under state law, the compensation outlined in that agreement had legal priority over the distribution of the estate. The number she read out was substantial. Richard's face went pale. "You can't do this," he said. "Not to Carol, to me." "It's already done," I said. Diane started talking about contesting. Gerald started talking about lawyers. Carol let them finish. Then she explained, very calmly, that challenging the document would require proving Mom had signed under duress or lacked capacity. There were 6 years of medical records, notary stamps, and witness signatures that said otherwise. The room went very quiet. Richard looked at me across the table. "You planned this." "Yes," I said. "I did. Someone had to plan something." They left without saying goodbye. I drove home to the house I had lived in for 20 years. Mom's house. My house now. I made tea. I sat in the kitchen where I had given her 1,000 breakfasts. I looked at the chair by the window, where she used to sit facing the garden. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter than that. I felt seen. The ones who disappear when it gets hard always come back when there's something to gain. I think most of you already know that. But here's what they never understand. Showing up is not weakness. Staying is not surrender. And preparing quietly, carefully, legally, while they were busy elsewhere, is not betrayal. Mom called it good sense. She saw me, and in the end, the law did too. If you've ever been the one who stayed while others made excuses, your time matters. Your sacrifice matters. Have you ever been the caregiver in your family? Were you treated fairly? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. The next story is already waiting.